Welcome. In today's agricultural biology course, we're going to be talking about natural selection. As part of a thorough understanding of what happens in evolution, you really do need to understand what natural selection does and how it works. And that's what we're going to try to look at today. We're going to look at all the pieces, the parts, the concepts, the players, and see how they all work together to create the kind of environment as well as gene pool that we'll be studying so far this year. What I've done is I've drawn this concept map, and this concept map tries to outline all the different players and all the different concepts that come into play when we're talking about natural selection. The first thing that you've already discovered is evolution's definition is change over time. That's why we have the clock surrounding evolution. Evolution, though, needs something else to kind of make it work, and what it depends on is natural selection. As you can see here in the middle, I've included this little earth mover, and this earth mover represents natural selection because it's doing all the dirty work. It's doing all the heavy lifting. It's moving things around and making things change, kind of like what this earth mover will be doing as well. Now, really, the way it really works is natural selection really impacts itself or lets itself known directly on the population. That's the smallest unit in which it will work is within that population. And as natural selection applies its pressure to population, it's really going to impact phenotypes first. So it's going to be really working on those physical characteristics that we see. And one of the things that we talked about, of course, are the moths that were white and black. And those particular moths, of course, changed over time. And that was dependent upon that environmental pressure that manufacturing is doing is in the late 1800s. So natural selection, though, really works within that population to really impact the phenotypes. And the way it works is it goes through basically using different kinds of pressure on that population. So whether it be environmental pressures or biological pressures, that particular population is going to feel some sort of pressure depending upon this Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium. The Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium concept basically says that a particular gene pool, its frequency of genes will not change over time, not so long as it stays within these 5 kind of rules. When one of those rules are broken, then the frequency will change. In the example that I'm going to give you today, what's going to happen is selection is going to start changing it. For instance, we're going to have an environmental pressure. For instance, let's take a look at the Hawaiian silver sword. The pressure came in the form of biological and also environmental as well. But biological because of all the grazing animals that were starting to impact Hawaii basically in the late 1800s. And when it started to, they started to bring on cattle and sheep and goats onto the island, they started to graze away on the silver sword and other things around it to make the environment change as well. So the Hardy-Weinberg equilibrium law basically is saying that that population will try to maintain that particular genotype or that gene frequency in the gene pool. And when one of those 5 laws gets somehow changes because of the things that go on in the environment, it will begin to have an impact on the population. So these pressures are going to go directly to the population and work primarily on the phenotypes. Now, what happens is if a phenotype it actually can make it to the next generation, we call that, it tends to have basically a high fitness rate. So if this population undergoes pressure and it actually survives, that particular trait survives. Like for instance, if we take the white and the black moths, those particular white moths that were able to have a kind of a variety that was more black or grayish, or actually had more dots in it, it blended into these blackened birch trees, and they were able to survive. They took that trait and survived it. And that frequency of that gene of black began to increase because there was a selection pressure being applied. And because it had high fitness, it was able to adapt. And when it's able to adapt, it's going to be changing the gene pool. The genotypes will begin to change over time. Now, in the case of a trait maybe not making it, or having low fitness, what's going to happen in this particular case, and let's put that guy right there, what's going to happen in this particular case is, as it doesn't make it, or it has fewer numbers, like in terms of like bottlenecking, what's going to happen in this low fitness is eventually death and of course extinction are going to take place, and that too will also affect the frequency of the genes. So you can see in this particular example, there's a variety of different concepts that come into play when natural selection takes hold. And natural selection, remember, it impacts, the smallest unit it impacts is going to be the population, and within that time frame, it's going to really be selecting certain phenotypes. Some will be considered of high fitness, some low fitness. The ones that are high fitness, you get adaptation. You get low fitness, you could see more death or extinction, or as the population shrinks, we get to what we call a bottleneck, and basically genetic variation is severely hampered, and the variety that once was there can be eliminated, just like in the silver sword in Hawaii. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I want to watch a movie, or not a movie, but a really small video clip on how natural selection works. We're going to go to the Northwest, and you're going to see this competition between two different species. So here we go. It's called the arms race.
On a misty morning, western Oregon seems a mild place, fit for gentle creatures like beaver and duck. Yet this is home to one of the deadliest animals on Earth. Local legend long hinted at its lethal power. Eventually, a tale of untimely death attracted the scrutiny of science.
When I was an undergraduate student 37 years ago, my professor told me a story about 3 hunters out here in the Coast Range being found dead, and there was a newt boiled in their coffee pot.
That's a good one.
Nice one. So his question to me was, go find out if these newts are poisonous.
Edmund Brody Jr. has studied the rough-skinned newt ever since. The last decade or so with his son, Edmund Brody III. It turns out the newt is extremely poisonous. Its skin glands secrete one of the most potent toxins found in nature. When ingested, the toxin can paralyze a victim within minutes and shut down vital functions within hours. An amount equivalent to a pinhead can kill an adult human.
This is probably the most poisonous animal in the world, with enough skin toxin to kill tens of thousands of mice or perhaps 100 people. Of course, they don't bite, so this isn't really dangerous holding it unless I were to eat it, which I won't. The question was, why should a small animal like this be so many times more toxic than necessary to kill all predators? Why should a salamander evolve that much toxin?
Yeah, I can smell the secretion.
Don't lick your hands.
I'll try not to.
no environmental factor can explain the evolution of the newt's extreme toxicity. The Brodies discovered another animal is responsible.
I'm gonna head over to these brambles.
Okay.
The common garter snake thrives in these parts. Harmless to humans, it feeds on earthworms, frogs, and toads. But there's one prey in the snake's diet a few other predators ever touch.
She's got a food item.
Oh, yeah.
Look at that. It's a pretty big object. I don't know if it's big enough to be a newt, but it could be. Come on, honey. Here it comes.
Yeah, here it is.
Hey, how about that?
It had eaten a full-size male newt.
Yeah. This species of garter snake is the predator that we think is driving the evolution of the high toxin levels in the newts. This is the only thing that can survive an encounter with a newt. It's the only thing that can, therefore, represent a selective pressure for increasing toxicity. As the snakes get better at resisting the effects of the toxin, the prey has to evolve higher levels of toxin. You can think of this as this sort of escalating, counter-escalating arms race between the predator and the newt, the prey.
But the toxin does take a toll. Some snakes are slowed down. Others are immobilized for a few hours after eating a newt.
So, if we were to summarize everything that we have kind of gone over today, it would probably be this. First of all, natural selection. Is a mover and shaker as far as evolution is concerned. It impacts, of course, the population. And that population reacts. And of course, it's using the natural selection is using certain pressures, whether it be a selection pressure. And the population responds by either being high fitness or low fitness. If it undergoes high fitness, that means it survived, which means it is adapted. Or it doesn't, which could lead eventually to death. And of course, it's always the population, but it's also about the gene pool changing. The gene pool, a varied gene pool, has a much better chance of adaptation because it has more tools. It has more things in which it can combat the things that goes on. For instance, in the film that we saw, the snake was able to adapt. However, there were some trade-offs to it. But they still had the genetic composition to be able to make those changes biologically, physiologically, and also sometimes even behaviorally. Well, I hope that's helped put in perspective what evolution is and how natural selection plays a major role in that. I hope it's helped. We'll see you later. Thanks.